Well, last weekend, week 6 of the 2021 college football season was probably one of the best and craziest weekends that we've had so far this year. And I don't know if week 7 can live up to that, but we do have a pretty good slate of games coming up this weekend in college football. In today's video, I'm going to talk about some of those games, and I'm going to give you a prediction against the spread. Try to help you make some money. Let's go. Yeah, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Also, in tune addition to that as well. Hey, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. Did you know I post college football videos almost every single day of the year? Some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. You can let me know in the comments down below. But we're going to run through some of the games tomorrow, Saturday. Starting with some of the noon games are going up through prime time. I'll talk about them a little bit, tell you who I think is going to win, and give you a prediction against the spread. Let's get started. As usual, all the numbers that I use in today's video are going to come straight from betnow.eu. You can visit www.betnow.eu and see all the updated lines for whenever you happen to be watching this video. I've been using betnow.eu for years. I'm comfortable with it. I'm familiar with it. I've never had any problems getting money in or out, so I continue to use them. You can check them out, www.betnow.eu. And don't tell anybody, but the Uncle Lou code still works. So if you put some money in there and create an account, you can use the promo code Uncle Lou. That's one word, Uncle Lou, and they'll give you a bonus on whatever you deposit. Good luck. All right, 12 o'clock over on ABC. We got Central Florida on the road at a red-hot Cincinnati team who finds themselves now ranked within the top 4. We'll see if that continues when the playoff rankings start to come out a few weeks down the road. But right now, Cincinnati's put themselves in a pretty good position to at least make a case to be one of the 4 final playoff teams. They've got 2 Power 5 wins, of course, over Indiana and Notre Dame, and they've really blown out every other opponent they've played. On paper, this looks like a pretty good game, especially in the preseason. 2 of the better group of 5 programs over the last several years here, Central Florida and Cincinnati. Unfortunately for college football fans like me, Central Florida is just not the same team this year that we're used to seeing the last few years. Under first-year head coach Gus Malzahn, things haven't necessarily gone as planned for Central Florida. Add to that the fact that they lost a Heisman candidate, QB, to injury, and this game isn't expected to be very close. Cincinnati is a 21.5-point home favorite. Cincinnati has done nothing but cover the entire year. You got to look at it from Cincinnati's point of view. They know they're on the outside looking in at a playoff spot, even if they go 13-0 with a conference title. In their minds, and they're probably right, it's not just good enough to win these games. They need to win these games convincingly. I've made a lot of money betting on Cincinnati over the last couple of years because of this reason. If they have an opportunity to blow somebody out in the second half, they're going to do it. A home game for Cincinnati, I think they will do it. I'm going to take Cincinnati and lay to 21.5 points. All right, also at 12 o'clock, this one's over on FS1. We have undefeated, kind of surprisingly, undefeated Michigan State Spartans going on the road to take on a somewhat disappointing Indiana team. Michigan State running back Kenneth Walker has been unbelievable this year. He's already up over 1,000 yards, and he's on almost everyone's Heisman list. Him and Bijan Robinson at Texas, the 2 best running backs so far through the first half of the college football season. Indiana been a little bit underwhelming. It is a home game for Indiana. You look at the Big Ten East, of course, Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, kind of a 4-way meat grinder there. All 4 of those teams have to play each other coming up here in the next several weeks. I just find it hard to believe that all of these Big East teams can just keep on winning. I know Penn State and Ohio State have the one loss, Ohio State to Oregon, Penn State to Iowa, but those are 2 pretty good losses. Michigan and Michigan State both undefeated. I just have a feeling this is the week that Michigan State trips up. I do think Michigan State's a better team, and I think if these 2 teams played 10 times, Michigan State would beat them 7 or 8 times out of 10. It's a home game for Indiana. I don't know why. I really don't have any logic or rhyme or reason, so I wouldn't listen to anything I say on this one. This is more of a gut feeling here. I have a feeling Indiana could win this game outright or at least keep it very, very close. They are the home team. I'm going to take Indiana in this one in the 4.5 points, although I admit I'm not very confident on this one. Upsets happen every week. We all know that. That's not hard to figure out. The hard part is figuring out which games the upsets are going to come in. I just have a feeling we might see one here. It's an early game. Michigan State's got to travel to play at Indiana. We'll see. I'm going to take Indiana into 4.5 points. All right, 12 o'clock over on Fox. Oklahoma State at Texas. Now, how is Texas going to respond to that heartbreaking loss in the Red River rivalry last week to their rival, Oklahoma? One of the best games we've seen this entire college football season. Of course, Texas got out to an early 14-0 lead, had a huge lead in the second half, and slowly Oklahoma started eating into that lead. Texas defense fell apart. Oklahoma made the change at quarterback from Spencer Rattler to Caleb Williams, and the rest is history. Oklahoma come back and win the game in the last couple of minutes there. Heartbreaking loss for Texas. Now they get to come back home and face an undefeated Oklahoma State team, and Texas is a 3.5-point home favorite. I kind of feel the same way about this game that I feel about the Michigan State game. Not that I don't think Oklahoma State's any good, and they probably even could beat Texas a few times if you want to do the whole if they played 10 times thing. Oklahoma State would beat them a few times. Oklahoma State's a pretty good team. I just feel like we've seen this from Oklahoma State before, and it never holds up over the long run. I'm going to put my faith in Texas. I don't know why. Bijan Robinson maybe. And I think their quarterback, Casey Thompson, had a pretty good game last week too, particularly in the first half. We'll see. Sarkisian's going to have to find a way to keep this team together this week, not feeling sorry for themselves after that loss. I just have a feeling this is the week also where Oklahoma State finally catches their first loss. 3.5 points. It's kind of dicey. I could see this being another close game for Texas. Since it's at home, though, I am going to take the Longhorns. Give me Texas, lay to 3.5. Oklahoma State takes their first L. All right, how about this one, 12 o'clock on CBS? Auburn has to go on the road and take on a pretty good Arkansas team. Arkansas started out red hot, moved up to number 8 in the country before losing their last 2 games on the road to Georgia and last week on the road to Ole Miss, and another amazing game that we saw last weekend. Auburn had a loss last week, kind of a beating to UGA, a home loss for Auburn. They lost, 34-10, something like that. Arkansas has got to find a way to win this game. It was a good story, but they're on a 2-game losing streak right now, and you look at the SEC West, and not that it's wide open, but Arkansas has got a small chance. Auburn's definitely got a chance. They need to win this game. Both teams need to win this game. I think this could be a close game. It's a huge benefit, in my opinion, to have this game at home for Arkansas. Auburn's one of the toughest places to play in the SEC. I actually think Arkansas can win this game at home, but I think 5 points is a little bit too much. I'm going to take Auburn in the 5 points. I'm not real sure who ends up winning this game. Arkansas could win it. Auburn could win it. I could see it being like a field goal type of game. Of course, if you remember last year, this game had one of the weirdest endings we've seen in the last couple of years. Bo Nix threw what appeared to everyone to be a backwards pass. The referee didn't see it that way, gave Auburn another down. They kicked a field goal and won the game. Most people think Arkansas did and should have won that game. Sort of a rematch type situation at home this year, from a bitter loss last year to the Barners. This is one of the more interesting games of the week to me. There's one coming up at night, too, that I think is really interesting. But Auburn has a chance, if they can go on a run here, to win the West and keep Alabama out of the SEC title game and the playoffs. The last game of the season, of course, is the Iron Bowl. Auburn versus Alabama. It's in Auburn this year. And Nick Saban, more than anywhere else, has struggled to win on the road at Auburn. Not that he doesn't have a lot of wins there. He does. But he's also got some significant losses there as well. So Auburn, even though they took the loss last week to Georgia, and they lost a close one on the road earlier in the season to Penn State, the Penn State loss doesn't count against them in the SEC. So if Auburn can get hot and win a few games here, heading towards that Iron Bowl, that sure would make an interesting matchup there in the last week of the regular season between Alabama and Auburn. I'm going to take the Barners in the 5 points and just hope they can keep it close. All right, Florida on the road at LSU, 12 o'clock on ESPN. This is, of course, a game that gets played every year. Florida and LSU are the East and West teams that play every single year. Last year, a huge upset win for LSU on the road at a top 10 Florida team. And another game that had a really weird ending, if you remember the Florida player. Florida actually made a critical stop late in that game on 3rd down. LSU would have had to punt it away, likely sealing a Florida win. After the tackle, a Florida player picked up the opposing LSU player's shoe and literally threw it 30 yards downfield. And everybody on the internet has had a ton of fun with that for the last year. Rematch time for Florida. They go on the road to LSU, which typically is a tough place to play, but they get a benefit here with the game being at noon. Obviously, easier to play on the road at noon than it is at night. And LSU, let's just be honest, not a very good team this year for whatever reason. Super talented, but it's not translating to play on the field. If you look at the 24/7 Sports Talent Index, LSU is actually the 5th most talented team in America, and they might go 4-8 this year. absolutely unacceptable. A lot of people thinking this could be Ed Orgeron's last year at LSU. Some people even think he won't make it to the end of the year. I think this is a critical game for LSU, and if they're going to turn things around at any point this season, it's got to start this week at home against Florida. LSU has had Florida's number the last 10 years. I believe LSU is something like 7-3 against Florida in the last 10 years. It's something like that, but they've got an edge on the series in the last 10 years, and they've got to find a way. If they're going to save their season at all, it's got to start this week. This seems like sort of an all-or-nothing game here for LSU at home. Unfortunately, I just don't think they're good enough to beat Florida. I really don't. I don't think Florida is anywhere near as good as they were last year, particularly on offense. I think you can make the argument Florida is actually a little bit better on defense than they were last year, but overall offensively, clearly they're not as dynamic, not putting up the number of yards or points that they were last year after losing Trask and all those receivers and Kyle Pitts at tight end and all that, but a lot better so far this year than what I've seen from LSU. You add to that the fact that LSU has got players dropping like flies. Really the only comparison I can think of to the number of injuries that LSU has sustained to key players is Georgia, who, of course, has been missing 6 or 7 starters for the entire season, including quarterback. LSU had another couple of players they announced this week that are now done for the season. Last week they announced Booty was done for the season. It just hasn't been good for LSU. 11.5 points, though. Florida is favored on the road at LSU. If you know anything about this series, 11.5 points is a lot of points to give in this series. Even if you go back to 2019, when LSU was just absolutely blowing everybody out, Florida gave them one of the best games of the year. Could LSU do the opposite to Florida this year? Well, we saw them do it last year. LSU was a significant underdog in this game in Gainesville last year and went in there and won the game. Now, like I said, they had huge help from Florida at the end with one of the most boneheaded, unsportsmanlike conduct penalties you'll ever see, with the Florida defensive back throwing a guy's shoe down the field. I doubt you'll see anything like that this year from Florida. I'm going to say this right now. I do not think LSU wins this game. I think Florida wins this game. So the only question in terms of betting the game is, do you think Florida can win this game by more than 11.5? And I do. I honestly believe LSU might be in give-up mode right now. All those players lost. The players, they're not stupid. They have cell phones. They have the internet. They see all the talk about Ed Orgeron. The NCAA is still there nosing around. I just think it's a bad situation right now for LSU. I think Florida goes into Baton Rouge and gets a big win. I'm going to take the Gators, Lady 11.5. All right, 3:30 over on CBS, the CBS Game of the Week. College Game Day will be there. SEC Nation will be there, all broadcasting live Saturday morning leading up to this game. Kentucky on the road at Georgia. Of course, Georgia now the unanimous number one team in America in every single poll after Alabama took a humiliating loss to a 2-loss, unranked, terrible Texas A&M team last week. Kentucky comes in red hot as well. They're 6-0. This is actually the first time any two SEC East teams have faced off in the regular season with both being at least 6-0 or better. Clearly, whoever wins this game has the inside track to Atlanta for the SEC title game. The winner of this game would need to lose 2 additional games in order for the loser to reclaim first place. So that wouldn't be something that would be likely to happen. This game kind of reminds me for Georgia of the Georgia-Arkansas game a couple of weeks ago. And if you look at the point spread, we're seeing a similar thing happen here. If you remember 2 weeks ago, the line opened up. Georgia was an 18.5 point favorite over Arkansas. News started to come out during the week that JT Daniels wasn't going to be able to go and that Stetson Bennett was going to be the guy. And the line actually dropped all the way down to 16 at one point, ending up at 16.5. We're seeing something similar with this game here. Of course, nobody expects JT Daniels to play. This line opened up around 23.5, went up to 24. It's now down at time of recording to 21.5. So almost a 3-point drop, or it is a 3-point drop, almost a 3-point drop in this game in Kentucky's favor over the last couple of days. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not buying it. I am a believer in Georgia. Clearly, I'm a Georgia fan, and Georgia's defense is that good. Can Georgia win this game by more than 21.5? Of course they can. I think Georgia's going to score in the 30s, and it's a legitimate question to ask. Can Kentucky score more than 10? It's a legitimate question to ask. I can see Kentucky scoring a touchdown and maybe a couple of field goals. I'm going to be honest, I don't see any way Kentucky scores more than 13 points. They scored 16 on the road at South Carolina. Offensively, they only scored 13 at home against Florida. Their best offensive output really of the season was against Mizzou, but everyone that's played Mizzou has put up 40, 50, or 60 points. I'm not all that impressed with Kentucky's offense. I'm just going to be honest. I think they've got a good line of scrimmage. I think Wan'Dale Robinson is an elite playmaker, especially in space. I think the problem is going to be finding space against that Georgia defense to get Wan'Dale Robinson involved. Will Levis is a decent quarterback, but he's not nearly dynamic or game-changing enough, in my opinion, to beat UGA this Saturday in Athens, which I think is another huge benefit for Georgia in this game. Home crowds can have a significant advantage on games. Look at the Kentucky-Florida game. The crowd obviously had a big role there. You look at the Georgia-Arkansas game 2 weeks ago, the Georgia crowd had a huge impact on that game. I can't even remember how many false start penalties Arkansas had. I think you're going to see some of that same thing from Kentucky this week. That was a noon game when we played Arkansas. This one's at 3:30. Crowd should be even more juiced up by 3:30 than they were for the noon kickoff a couple of weeks ago. Kentucky's also got a huge problem holding on to the ball. Will Levis, I believe, has an interception in every single game this year. 6 interceptions, I believe. And they've got a ton of fumbles. Now, they've recovered a lot of those fumbles. But if you just look at the number of fumbles, it's just ridiculous how often Kentucky puts the ball on the ground. You give Georgia a couple of turnovers, then just forget it. They're 100% going to cover this 21.5. I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia scores a touchdown in this game defensively as well because of Kentucky's penchant of turning the ball over. I think Georgia can cover this 21.5 at home. I think this game will be over relatively quick. I think Georgia's going to jump on Kentucky early in the first half. I think Georgia will probably have a 3-touchdown lead or so in this game at halftime. And in the second half, you're going to see Georgia's ground game punish Kentucky, wear them out, and win this thing going away somewhere in the neighborhood of 38-10 or 38-13, which would cover the 21.5. Georgia's 5-1 in their 6 games this year against the spread. The only game they didn't cover the spread was South Carolina, and that's when South Carolina scored a late touchdown mop-up duty against mostly backups and walk-ons on UGA's defense. UGA's only given up 2 touchdowns for the entire season. I don't see Kentucky scoring more than 2 touchdowns, and I think that's what they would have to do to win the game or stay within 21. Give me the Dogs at home, late at 21.5. All right, 3:30 over on the ACC network. We've got one of the hardest games of the week to figure out, I think. Miami on the road at North Carolina. North Carolina's a 7.5-point home favorite. Betting on or against or for or against North Carolina this year has been like flipping a coin. I don't know if there's been a more Jekyll and Hyde team in all of college football than North Carolina. They were top 10 in the preseason, lost week 1 to North Carolina, got beat last week by Florida State, and really weren't even competitive in the game. Other weeks you watch them play, and Sam Howell and that offense looks like what we thought they would look like. It's been very hard, almost impossible to figure out what version of North Carolina is going to show up from week to week. Miami, on the other hand, they've got their own problems, issues, and situations. They're down to about their third-string quarterback, depending on what you feel about Garcia. But, of course, Derek King done for the year. Their highly recruited freshman, foot injury, he's out. So they're down to Van Dyke or whatever his name is, basically your third-string QB. If he goes down, forget it. I'll have to put a wide receiver or something in there. Miami, again, another disappointing year for Miami. I don't know how this keeps happening to Miami, but somehow it does. They've had about 3 good seasons over the last 15 years since joining the ACC. In all 3 cases, they have followed those good seasons up with terrible seasons, and it's happening again somehow in 2021. Miami won, what was Miami, 9-2 or 9-3, 10-3, whatever they ended up being last year. A pretty good year for Miami if you look at their records over the last 15 years. And they come out this year and they're just falling on their face. Everybody, the fan base wants Manny Diaz fired. They're not happy with the quarterback situation. They're not happy with who's playing. They're not happy with the injuries. You got the thing where the coaching staff came out and said Derek King was choosing to have season-ending surgery, and Derek King was like, "What do you mean choosing? I got her to have surgery." It's just a mess down there. Miami's got to go on the road. I'll say this about this game. I think you have to take North Carolina and lay the 7.5 or not play the game. I don't see how you put money on Miami in this situation. I just don't. They're down to basically a nobody at quarterback. No offense to the kid, but this guy would not be playing if you didn't have all these injuries at QB. They're banged up in other places. Even where they're not banged up, they haven't played up to expectations. Only one real playmaker on the outside at wide receiver. But again, a third-string quarterback throwing to him. The defense has let you down all year. Manny Diaz is feeling the heat from the fans. Just not a good time to be putting money on Miami, in my opinion. You can obviously say the same thing about North Carolina. I'm probably not going to put one dime on this game because I just don't know what version of North Carolina is going to show up. But what I do know is this. If the average version of both of these teams show up here, North Carolina will win by more than 7.5. So the purpose of this video, give me the Tar Heels, lay to 7.5. But these are two bad teams here. All right, moving into some primetime games now. We've got Alabama going on the road to take on Mississippi State, 7 o'clock on ESPN. Mississippi State's a 17-point home underdog in this game. Bama, a big favorite. Bama, of course, coming off an embarrassing loss, in my opinion, last week to what I think is not a very good Texas A&M team. Maybe Texas A&M played their best game of the year, and I've heard all that said all week long, but the reality is Texas A&M's offense has been non-existent all year long, and suddenly they put up 41 on Alabama with a backup QB in Calzada. Mississippi State, one of the worst teams in the SEC so far this season. Mike Leach is going to come out and throw the ball 80 times in this game. You already know that. This is a game I've actually kind of evolved on as the week has gone on. I do think there's something to say about the idea of, boy, you don't want to be the team that plays Alabama after they take a loss. I agree with that in general. And I don't see any way Alabama loses this game. I'll just go ahead and get that right out in the open now. I don't care if it's being played at Mississippi State. There ain't enough cowbell on planet Earth for Alabama to lose this game on the road at Mississippi State. That being said, though, I don't know if they can cover the 17. I'm of the belief that Alabama has some significant issues this season that can't be corrected just because you got beat by Texas A&M. I don't care how much Nick Saban yells and screams at Alabama this year, their lines of scrimmage are still not going to be elite. Their wide receivers aren't going to learn how to catch passes in 7 days. The problem was not Bryce Young last week, and I'm not that he had his best game, but Bryce Young played well enough to win. The Alabama receivers have some issues catching the ball. One thing's clear. They missed Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and some of those other guys. I know, Mechie's good and they've got talent, no doubt about it. But if you're not catching the ball, it's hard to sustain drives, particularly if you get put in third and long situations where you have to make a play. And Alabama had a lot of those against Texas A&M where the pass was maybe not perfect, but definitely catchable, and Alabama had a hard time hanging on. Their defense is up and down. They tend to get bullied along the lines of scrimmage. I've seen it now in 2 different games. I don't think Mississippi State can win this game, but I do think Mike Leach in the air raid and 5 wide receivers and throwing the ball 67 times, I think can put enough pressure on Alabama's defense to keep this thing closer than 17. I'm going to take the home team, Mississippi State, and the 17 points. Again, I don't expect Mississippi State to win this game. I could see Alabama winning somewhere in the 35-21 range. Okay, and now it's time for what I think is probably the most interesting game of the week. Ole Miss on the road at Tennessee in Knoxville at night, SEC Network, 7:30. Tennessee is wearing the creamsicle uniforms, the orange, and everything orange. They're doing the checker kneeling deal. This is a huge game for Tennessee. Make no mistake about it. You can track the beginning of the downfall, sort of, in my opinion, of Tennessee to the moment Lane Kiffin walked out the door on them basically in the middle of the night. Since that has happened, Tennessee has been sort of wandering through the desert, no man's land. They haven't been able to get anything together, gone through coach after coach after coach. Nothing has seemed to work. This is an opportunity, I think, for Tennessee to put a bookend on what has been probably the worst 15-year history in all of Tennessee football. You have to remember, Tennessee has 8 losing seasons in the last 13 years. I don't think you can find any other 13-year period in Tennessee history where they have 8 losing seasons. It has been really, really bad. Tennessee's got a chance here to beat Lane Kiffin in prime time, at night, at home, as an underdog, after they've already won 2 games in a row, huge. And I think at least try to put the other bookend on this just disastrous period of Tennessee football. Now, I'm not going to pretend that beating Mississippi is going to miraculously cure or solve all of Tennessee's problems. But the opportunity is there for Tennessee to use this game as the first step, I think, towards putting this last 15 years behind them and heading in a more upward and positive direction. And I don't think that aspect of this game can be overstated. I've heard from Tennessee fans for years that it's Lane Kiffin's fault. But ever since he left, it's just been a comedy of errors there. And this is an interesting opportunity, I think, to sort of wrap that up. Not going to be a very welcoming environment there for Lane Kiffin when he comes into that stadium. Now, Ole Miss is a 2.5-point road favorite in this game. The over-under is up to 82, and I do expect this to be like a basketball-type score. These are two offenses that have scored a ton of points this year and two defenses that basically don't exist. I think these are two really bad defenses. Tennessee obviously has a huge advantage here playing at home. Tennessee has got to keep this game close into the second half. Tennessee needs this crowd. First of all, they need the fans to stay to the end of this game. In order for that to happen, Tennessee's got to be winning or within striking distance in the second half of this game. Tennessee cannot fall down by 10, 14, 20, 21 points in the first half of this game. For one thing, the fans are going to go into the been here, seen that before sort of mentality, and they will start trickling out of that stadium. The players themselves, confidence has been a big issue for Tennessee. Winning close games in the end has been a big issue for Tennessee. They've lost so many of them. It's like you have to learn to win. If they look up on the scoreboard halfway through the second quarter and they're down 20 points, it's going to be hard for that team to keep the confidence, I think, to make some kind of a comeback and win the game. And Ole Miss has an offense that you just don't want to fall behind on. With that being said, I do think Tennessee has an opportunity to win this game. Now, they're going to have to do a couple of things. Number one, they cannot turn the ball over. Hendon Ho, and I know it's Hendon Hooker, Hendon Ho has played better the last couple of weeks than either he or Milton were playing the first couple of weeks of the season. They've got to hang on to the ball. I also think Tennessee's going to have to be able to run the ball some in this game. And Ole Miss, maybe their defense isn't as bad as it was last year. In fact, I know it's not as bad as it was last year, but it's by no means elite. I don't think Tennessee can just rely on Hendon Ho to sling this ball around 50 or 60 times. I think some ball control here to rest Tennessee's defense against a pretty good Ole Miss offense is going to be important. So Tennessee's going to need to run the ball. Hendon Ho cannot turn the ball over, and Tennessee's got to hit the open receivers when they're there, and there will be some there, I think, in my opinion. Now, this is another thing that they've cleaned up a lot over the last couple of weeks. Receivers running wide open and the ball being thrown 30 yards over their head. We haven't seen nearly as much of that from Tennessee in the last couple of weeks as we did the couple of weeks before that. This would be a huge win for Tennessee. I've got a lot of Tennessee buddies from doing this YouTube channel for so long. I've got some Ole Miss friends too, and while I don't really have a rooting interest in this game, for the third week in a row, I'm going to take Tennessee. Give me the 2.5 points. But for the third week in a row, I'm going to take Tennessee in honor of BVD and all the other Tennessee fans who have sort of, they've just gotten the short end of the stick here on YouTube. Pretty much since YouTube was invented back in 07 or 08, whatever it was. Tennessee's just been pretty bad for pretty much the entire existence of YouTube. Doesn't hurt my feelings to see Tennessee get a couple of big wins, especially when you look at the fact that they've got Georgia and Alabama coming up. Tennessee does. Those are pretty obviously going to be losses. It would be nice for Tennessee to get another win here. Maybe they beat Kentucky. I think that would be a great win for Tennessee later in the year. And, of course, they can finish things up with a win over Vandy. And Tennessee could end up having a pretty good year. I mean, if Tennessee could somehow get to 7 or 8 wins, that would be an unbelievable success for Josh Heupel in year one at Tennessee, given what the program has gone through in the last 8 or 9 months. Terrible season last year. Pruitt fired. NCAA investigation. 26 players transferred out. Quarterback hokey pokey the first month of this season. If Tennessee somehow finished up this season with 7 or 8 wins, I think that would be a huge W for Josh Heupel in the Tennessee Vols. I think this is going to be one of the most exciting games of the day. I don't think I'm going to bet any money on this game because I want to watch this game and just enjoy it for what it is. So I probably won't put money on this game one way or the other. But like I said, for all my Tennessee buddies that have been around here forever on the struggle bus, give me the Vols and the 2.5 points.